AITA for calling the police after my parents camped on my lawn to claim my house. I was born when my parents were only 17 years old. They had to drop out of high school to find jobs and provide for me. My father was furious about the situation because he had a promising future and planned to play football in college, but he ended up working at a fast food restaurant. My mother couldn't take care of me either because she worked all day as a house cleaner to earn a little money. Instead, I spent all my time with a neighbor who became a more important parental figure to me than my own parents. From a very young age, I understood that I was an unwanted child. The only people who loved me were my neighbor and my paternal grandparents. My maternal grandparents didn't even want to hear about me. When I was 5 years old, my sister was born, and the differences in the love we received became obvious even to me as a child. We lived in a small house with only 2 bedrooms, so at first, we had to share a room, but soon, I was completely kicked out so she could have her own space. They told me I was too old to share a room with a girl. Thus, for the next 5 years, I slept on the living room couch. I also had very few possessions. Most of my clothes were old hand-me-downs, and I barely had any school supplies. The only decent thing I owned was an old video game console that my paternal grandparents had given me for my birthday. When I was 12, my parents decided to move, but the move did not include me. Fortunately, my paternal grandparents took me in. From now on, I will simply call them my grandparents. Things got much better with them. Not only did I have my own room, but there were also other kids my age in the neighborhood. I was able to make friends and live a more normal childhood. I went to their houses to play, ride bikes, and play ball in the street, all things I had never been able to do before. My grandparents also spoiled me with gifts like a newer console, toys, and new clothes. At 18, I found a job and moved out of their house, but after 2 years, I returned to live with them. They were getting older and needed help. I preferred to save on rent so I could cover their expenses and help with their bills. During this time, my parents did not care about me, nor did they offer any help to my grandparents. They didn't call or ask how I was doing. They had simply disappeared. I also had no relationship with my sister. She had simply vanished from my life at the same time. My grandfather was very careful with money. As a young man, his family had lost everything during the Great Depression, which had a profound effect on him. He was not stingy, but he was very frugal. He had always wanted to build a fallout shelter in the backyard, but never did. Instead, he made sure to be prepared for emergencies, like having a generator in case of power outages during winter storms, which happened more often than we would have liked where we lived. Fortunately, there was always extra gas for the generator that kept us warm on those nights without electricity. About 4 years ago, my grandmother passed away suddenly. My grandfather was devastated, completely heartbroken. 2 years later, one morning as I was preparing breakfast, I noticed he hadn't come down. The smell of coffee always brought him to the kitchen, so I went upstairs to check on him. He wasn't moving. I called 911, but when the paramedics arrived, they told me he had passed away in his sleep. I had also suffered a lot from my grandmother's death, but I knew that my grandfather was dying from losing the love of his life. That is why his passing did not surprise me. His heart could not bear to be without her. My parents came to my grandfather's funeral, but they caused a scene. They argued loudly with other family members and were very rude. My sister arrived in a completely inappropriate, flashy dress for an occasion where everyone was dressed in black. They were there solely for the inheritance since they had not even come to my grandmother's funeral. They didn't have time for that, although we all know it is because there was no inheritance to be had at that time. When my grandparents passed away, all their belongings were left to me in their will, their savings, their car, and their house. Fortunately, the house was fully paid off and in excellent condition. My grandfather had redone the roof and painted the interior and exterior. After my grandmother's death, a neighbor who was a plumber had redone all the plumbing, so the house was in perfect condition. At the funeral, I noticed my parents whispering in secret while glancing at me from afar. Later, I discovered that they knew my grandparents had disinherited them a long time ago because of the way they treated me when I was a child. Needless to say, according to their logic, this was unfair. When the will was executed and it was clear that I was inheriting everything, they threatened to sue me. I started receiving furious calls and messages from my father, claiming he was the rightful heir. I always responded with something like, "Leave me alone," or other things I prefer not to repeat here to prevent my post from being removed. Eventually, they took the case to court, but luckily it didn't last too long. The judge ruled in my favor after hearing both sides, especially when I recounted the neglect I suffered in my childhood. For example, when I was 5 years old, my parents locked me outside in the middle of winter for hours while they watched television inside. The reason? I didn't want to change the channel so they could watch what they wanted. I understand I could have been more flexible, but I was just a kid. Another time, when I was 6, they went out to dinner and left me home alone for what I think must have been a few hours. When they returned, they didn't bother making me dinner because they had already eaten, so I went to bed hungry that night. The judge told my father that in all his years on the bench, he had never seen a worse example of parenting. My father said nothing at the time, but after the court hearing, he stopped me outside the courthouse. He told me I had ruined his life and that I was the biggest mistake he had ever made. He said that if he could go back in time, he would make sure I was never born because I had ruined his chances of becoming a football star. Instead, he had ended up working in a job where his name was on a name tag. For the record, he still works at a fast food restaurant. He was promoted to supervisor, so he no longer flips burgers, but his career clearly peaked, and he has nowhere to go. I replied that my grandparents had understood what kind of people he and my mother were, and that is why they had disinherited them. I told him I never asked to be born, that it was their responsibility, and that the only parental love I had known came from my grandparents. To me, my parents are dead. For a while after that, I continued to receive messages, emails, and even letters, but eventually, they stopped writing to me, tired of me not answering. When they called me, I would answer, place the phone on the table, and walk away, leaving them yelling on the other end. During all this time, they never showed any real interest in me. They only wanted the money and the house. From what I saw on Facebook, my sister tried to become a model, got married, had 2 children, got divorced, and now complains about her current job. My father is still at the same job he has held for 25 years. Before that, he worked at another fast food restaurant until it closed. His best days were clearly in high school. The same goes for my mother. She was a high school cheerleader and framed her old uniform. She constantly complains about her job on social media. I am now in my 30s and live quite comfortably thanks to my grandparents. I have no debt, I own my house, and I can save a large part of my salary. I didn't go to college because when I graduated from high school, my grandparents couldn't afford it, but I managed to find a good job with a decent salary that allows me to live comfortably. I have always worked very hard thanks to my grandfather, who taught me what it means to put in the effort. I am not rich, but I lack nothing, and that is enough for me. Moreover, not having rent or a mortgage to pay allows me to save a lot. The problem is that my parents have reappeared, and they are back because they want my house. Unlike other stories I have read here that inspired me to share mine, they don't want it for my sister, they want it for themselves. A few days ago, they showed up at my workplace making a scene, demanding to speak to me and saying they would camp in front of my house until I agreed to give it to them. I had to call security to have them escorted out. I thought it would end there, but now they have literally pitched a tent on my front lawn. It happened this afternoon. When I got home from work, there was a tent surrounded by their belongings. I asked them what they were doing, and my father told me he would stay until I gave them the house that rightfully belonged to them because, in his words, I had stolen it from my grandparents. I told him he could gather his things and leave immediately because I wouldn't give them the house, or else I would call the police and explain everything just like we had done with the judge. My father replied that the only way he would leave would be if I gave him the keys to the house so he could move in. I answered him, "Well, if you want to play this game, let's play," and I walked toward the door, unlocking it. I noticed my father following me, apparently hoping to get inside. Before opening the door, I turned on my phone's voice recorder and slipped it into my pocket. I asked him to step aside so I could enter, but he said nothing. When I finally opened the door, he tried to push past me to get in, but I grabbed his arm and threw him back onto the grass. He yelled that I couldn't keep him from entering his house and that he would eventually get in even if he had to break the door down. I finally got inside, locked the door, and called the police. My mother just stood there watching without intervening. When the police arrived, I explained what had happened and showed them the recording of my father's threats. He didn't expect me to have recorded that, so he couldn't invent another version of the facts. The officers stayed until my parents gathered their belongings and left. I invited the officers in for a coffee because it was cold and I wanted to thank them for getting my parents off my property. Update 1. It has been a few days since my last post, and I wanted to thank everyone for their advice and support. One of the best pieces of advice I received was to back up the recording of my father's threats to the cloud, just in case. I already did that, and it is reassuring to know it is safe. Someone also suggested I file for a restraining order. Although I was told it might not be granted, it is worth a try. Meanwhile, I ordered security cameras that should arrive tomorrow. I plan to install them myself this weekend. Luckily, my grandfather taught me a lot of practical skills when I lived with them. He always said it was important to be self-reliant and know how to fix things yourself. We spent countless hours together repairing appliances, furniture, and doing minor repairs around the house. Thanks to that, I feel quite confident with tools and following instructions. Installing the cameras should be a breeze, right? The worst-case scenario is that it is harder than expected and I will have to call a professional. As for my parents, they haven't tried anything else since the tent incident, but I know them. They are probably planning their next move. That is why I want to be ready. The reason for this update is that I received an unexpected call yesterday. It was my sister. In all these years, even when my parents were fighting for the inheritance, she never contacted me. No call, no message, nothing. So I was surprised to see her name on my phone screen. Let's just say our relationship is non-existent. I don't even consider her my sister because we never had a sibling bond. When I was very young, we barely interacted since she was a baby, and then after I moved to my grandparents, we never spoke. I answered because the number was unknown. After a brief and awkward introduction where she identified herself, she got straight to the point. I didn't recognize her voice because the last time I saw her as an adult was at the funeral, and even then, we didn't exchange words. She told me I needed to give the house to our parents. She said she knew I had inherited the money, and she thought it was only fair that I give them at least the house. She said she would do it if she could, but with 2 kids, a bad job, and a divorce, she couldn't afford to help them. But I know that is a lie. I am pretty sure she receives child support from her ex-husband, and, from what I have seen on her social media, her job doesn't seem that terrible. She always posts pictures of her office, and it doesn't look like a horrible place to work, so I don't buy her supposed lack of money. Honestly, my sister was never directly mean to me, but she was never a good sister either. She always had this air of superiority and arrogance, as if the world owed her something. Even as a child, when our parents treated me poorly and favored her, she never said anything. She never stood up for me or showed the slightest empathy. That is why this call feels suspicious. I think my sister might be up to something, perhaps in cahoots with our parents. They might think that by having her step in, she will make me cave, but they are wrong. I won't play their game. I told her as calmly as possible that I was not going to give them the house, that our grandparents left it to me for a reason, and that I was going to respect their wishes. If she wanted to help our parents, she was free to do so, but she needed to leave me out of it. She got angry and started screaming, calling me selfish and a bad son, saying our parents gave us life and we owed them everything, as if giving life made up for all the years of neglect and inappropriate behavior. I told her that parents who abandon and mistreat their child deserve nothing and that I owed them absolutely nothing. After that, I hung up. I am not going to tolerate any more manipulation, neither from my parents nor from my sister. It is my life, my house, and I am going to protect it. If that makes me a bad son in my sister's eyes, so be it. I spent too many years trying to win the love and approval of people who clearly don't deserve it. So that is the latest news, friends. I promise to keep you updated on any new developments, and once again, thank you for being here and for your words of encouragement. You have no idea how much it means to me to have this space to vent and ask for advice. It makes me feel less alone in this madness. It is not easy to talk about it with people in real life because it is not like someone asks, "What did you do last night?" And you reply, "I kicked my parents out of my yard. What about you?" It is easier to do it anonymously with people who don't know you. For those who asked if I considered moving, I have thought about it. However, my job is in this city and it would only be worth it if I could move far away from my toxic family. But even if I could, the truth is I love this house and my grandparents left it to me, so it is not like I want to sell it either. So, that is not an option right now. Good news update, friends. I finally managed to install the security cameras around my house, but let me tell you, it was quite a challenge. I started Saturday afternoon, all excited and ready to dive in. I had my toolbox, the instructions, and a YouTube tutorial ready on my phone. I told myself, it can't be that complicated. Well, that was my first mistake. It turns out the instructions were in Chinese. I don't know why I assumed they would be in English, but there I was trying to decipher hieroglyphs. Thank goodness for Google Translate. After an hour of struggling with translations, I was finally ready to start, but then I realized I didn't have a drill. How was I supposed to mount the cameras without a drill? So I had to stop everything and run to the hardware store. 2 hours and a round trip later, I was back home, ready to work. I started with the first camera. Everything was going fine until I realized I had mounted it upside down. Great. I had to unscrew everything and start over. When I finally finished the first camera, it was already dark, but I was determined to finish. So I kept going with the help of a flashlight and my trusty YouTube tutorial. Finally, after a lot of sweat, a few curses, and an alarming amount of coffee, I managed to install all the cameras. It was 2 a.m. on Sunday when I finished, but I did it all by myself, just like my grandfather taught me. I am sure somewhere he was laughing at my mishaps, but also proud of my perseverance. Now, let's talk about less fun things. I thought a lot about my sister's call and the possibility that she is planning to move into my house with my parents. I decided to try to get more information about this. So I went on Facebook and looked through my sister's friends. I found a woman she seems to have several photos with. They don't look like best friends, more like co-workers. I decided to send her a message, introducing myself as my sister's brother. She seemed surprised to hear from me, which confirms that my sister never talks about me. We started chatting a bit, and I quickly realized this woman doesn't have a very high opinion of my sister. She told me my sister is always complaining at work, acts superior to everyone, and talks about how much she deserves a better life. Not a huge surprise, but then she mentioned something that caught my attention. She told me my sister was having trouble with her apartment. Apparently, she is a few months behind on her rent and her landlord has threatened to evict her. This got me thinking, what if my sister is also planning to move into my house? The house my grandparents left me is quite large with 3 bedrooms. It would be comfortable enough for my parents and for her with her kids. I am starting to believe this is their plan. First, my sister tries to convince me to give the house to my parents. Then she moves in too. It is crazy to think they don't even consider that it is my house. Now, update 3. Friends, you are not going to believe what happened yesterday. I was looking at the footage from my security cameras, and I saw something that left me speechless. First, I noticed my father's car drive past my house several times. It was around 4 p.m. I thought it was weird, but I didn't think too much of it. Maybe he was just passing by, right? But then, about 30 minutes later, I saw my father walking down the street. I assume he parked further away to avoid drawing attention. He approached my house, looking around as if to make sure no one saw him. What he did next left me stunned. He jumped the fence into my backyard like a thief. Thank God I had installed a camera in the back too. I saw him walk up to the back windows of the house and peek inside, trying to see into the rooms. I was completely baffled. What was he doing? Was he trying to find a way to break in, or just spying to see the layout of the house? The strangest part is he didn't seem to notice the cameras, or if he saw them, he didn't care. It is like he was so focused on his mission that he didn't think about the possibility of being recorded. I watched my father walk around the house, testing the windows to see if any of them were open. Fortunately, I am always very vigilant about that. All the windows were securely locked. After about 15 minutes, he finally gave up, jumped the fence again, and disappeared into the night as quietly as he had arrived. I immediately made copies of the recording and backed them up in several places, including the cloud. If I ever need to use this as evidence, I want to make sure it is safe. Honestly, though, I am scared. I never thought my own parents could stoop so low. It is like they have no boundaries when it comes to trying to take my house. On a more positive note, amidst all this madness, something good happened. Remember I mentioned contacting my sister's coworker on Facebook? Well, we kept talking and I must say she is an amazing woman. She is funny, smart, and unlike my sister, she seems to have a genuine heart. We talk every day, and I am growing more and more attached to her. The best part is she is single. I know some might think it is crazy to pursue this given everything going on with my family, but I can't help being drawn to her. I am thinking about asking her out on a date, even if it is just for coffee and an in-person chat. Sure, The timing might seem bad with all the family drama, but honestly, I need a positive distraction right now, something to remind me there is more to life than this chaos. Obviously, I'm not going to tell her about my family problems right away. I don't want to scare her off. Meanwhile, I will keep an eye on the cameras. Now more than ever, I need to stay vigilant. I don't know what my parents might try next, but I won't let them catch me off guard. Thanks again for being here and listening to my ramblings. I can't emphasize enough how much it means to me to have this space. Update 4. Friends, so much has happened since my last update that I don't even know where to begin. But first, let me say that I was right. My parents were plotting something, and now I have proof. After what happened, I decided to review the security footage in detail. What I discovered left me speechless. It turns out my father's nighttime visit wasn't an isolated incident. He had been prowling around my house multiple times at different times of the day, even while I was inside sleeping. In one recording, I saw him trying to look through my bedroom window at 2 a.m., standing on his tiptoes to peek over the curtain. It gave me chills to think that while I was in bed, my own father was outside spying on me. But that is not all. Last week, I had to leave town for work for 2 nights. It was a last-minute trip, so I didn't have much time to prepare. I made sure to lock up the house securely and left thinking everything would be fine. I was so busy with work during the trip that I didn't even think to check the cameras. Coming home, I opened the door and immediately knew something was wrong. There were boxes everywhere and things were out of place. For a second, I thought I had been robbed, but then I saw a familiar photo on the wall and everything became clear. They weren't burglars, it was my parents, although, honestly, I think burglars are better people than them. I rushed to check the security footage and it was all there, like a horror movie. My parents had broken into the house while I was away. In the videos, you can see my father breaking a back window in the middle of the night and getting inside the house. Then, he went to the garage and opened the door from the inside, allowing my mother to enter with boxes and suitcases. For the next 2 days, I watched in horror as they gradually moved into my house. They brought so many boxes that it looked like they were settling in for good. I can't even begin to describe the anger and helplessness I felt watching those videos. The first thing I did was call the police, explain the situation, and ask for their help. Then, taking advantage of the fact that it was early and my parents were at work, I started removing all their belongings. And when I say all, I mean everything. Every box, every piece of clothing, every item that wasn't mine, I took them all out of the house. I didn't care if it was fragile or valuable. I grabbed everything and dumped it in a huge pile in the front yard. Just as I finished, the police arrived. I showed them all the security footage as well as the mess my parents had made with their belongings. They took my statement and left, saying they would handle it. A few hours later, I got a call from the police station. My parents had been arrested at their workplace for breaking and entering. Apparently, when the police told them what I had done, they got into a massive argument, screaming at each other and shifting the blame. It was quite a scene. It has been a week now and my parents are still in jail. My sister hasn't stopped calling me, begging me to drop the charges, but I am not going to do it. I have had enough of their manipulation and lack of respect. I think a little jail time is exactly what they need to understand the gravity of their actions. I made it clear to my sister. If she keeps defending them and trying to manipulate me, she might just end up in the same place as them. I don't care if she is the golden child. I will no longer tolerate any inappropriate behavior from them. That being said, I feel bad for her kids. They don't deserve to have such a toxic mother. I hope that somehow, this will serve as a wake-up call for her, and she will start thinking about the example she is setting for her children. I still can't be sure if my sister was directly involved in my parents' plan to take over my house. My guess is she manipulated them into doing it with the intention of moving in with them once they had control of the property. But aside from her constant defense of them, I have no concrete proof of her involvement. Regardless, I plan to move forward with the legal process. I want my parents to stand trial, and if possible, be convicted. I think it is the only way for them to understand that their actions have consequences. I can't live with the constant fear that they will invade my house and my life whenever they want. I need to put a stop to all of this for my mental and emotional health. In the meantime, I have been working on beefing up my home security. I installed an alarm system, and I am considering building a higher fence. I don't want to live in a fortress, but I never want to feel vulnerable in my own home again. I promise to keep you posted as I get more information on the case. Update 5. It has been 6 months since my last update, and here I am with new developments to share. After everything that happened, I finally have good news. First of all, the trial against my parents. After months of preparation and an exhausting legal process, the verdict finally came down. The judge did not mince words and sentenced them to a year in state prison. I suppose they will have plenty of time to reflect on their actions, all while enjoying the comfortable bunk beds of prison. They can't say I am a bad son. I found them an all-inclusive premium accommodation for a year. Besides the prison sentence, the judge also ordered them to pay me $5,000 in damages for what they did to my property. It isn't much, but I am satisfied that they faced consequences and are behind bars. As for my sister, I still haven't been able to definitively prove that she was involved in my parents' plan. To be honest, I am starting to doubt she played a direct role. I know it is hard to believe given her track record, but I haven't found any solid evidence tying her to the case. I guess that is something I will never know for sure. But it hasn't been all stress and legal drama. Do you remember the woman I met through all of this, my sister's coworker whom I connected with on Facebook? Well, after months of chatting and supporting each other, I finally found the courage to ask her out, and friends, it is the best thing that has happened to me in a long time. We have been dating for 3 months now, and every day I feel luckier to have her in my life. She is compassionate, understanding, and has a way of making me laugh even on the darkest days. She has been a ray of light amidst all this chaos. She even came with me to a few court hearings, which made it all a little easier to bear. Looking ahead, I am taking steps to make sure my parents won't be able to disrupt my life again once they are released from prison. I am working on filing for a restraining order, but my lawyer advised me to wait until their release date, so the order goes into effect right when they get out, thereby minimizing any opportunity for them to cause new problems. I have also been working on home improvements. Nothing major, just small projects here and there to make the place feel like my home again. It has been therapeutic in a way to reclaim my space and create new memories. Thanks to this online community, I don't know how difficult all this would have been without being able to post here. Comment. I know this story may bring up some heavy emotions for many of you. It really shows how crucial it is to protect your peace. Sometimes, the greatest act of self-respect is drawing a line that others are not allowed to cross. You are not responsible for the choices of others, but you are responsible for your own safety and well-being. True kindness means being kind to yourself first. Healing is not about forgetting the past, but about building a future where you feel secure. Choosing peace often requires making difficult and sometimes painful decisions in the present. Remember that you have the right to create a safe and loving environment for yourself. Never underestimate your strength to overcome difficult situations. I hope you all find the courage to prioritize your own well-being. If you like the stories, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.